So today's video is going to be a response to a comment on my previous video by Nate, who wants to know my philosophical beliefs and the philosophies that I believe in. So that is what this video is going to be about, is just the philosophies that I believe in. But before we get into the philosophies that I believe in, the beliefs that I hold, I just want to say that none of these beliefs are set in stone. I'm not fully 100% confident in these beliefs, that they cannot change in any way. I will change my beliefs based on the evidence that I'm presented, based on convincing arguments that are presented to me, based on sound, reasonable arguments. So just wanted to say that these things are not set in stone. I think being able to change your beliefs and positions based on new evidence, new arguments, new reasons presented is the most intellectually honest approach to holding our beliefs and believing in something. I think one of my favorite quotes from Marcus Aurelius is his quote where he talks about, "If anyone can refute me, show me I'm making a mistake or looking at things from the wrong perspective, I'll gladly change. It's the truth I'm after, and the truth never harmed anyone. What harms us is to persist in self-deceit and ignorance." So with that out of the way, let's get into the philosophies and beliefs that I hold, which the first one, no surprise, is atheism. Atheism very plainly is the position of not having a belief in a god or the existence of a god. For me, this belief comes from the fact that I am not convinced by the evidence that are presented by religions around the world, by individual people around the world, of the fact that God exists and that I should believe in a God. I think there's a heavy burden of proof on this claim, and the burden of proof has just not been met. I think that fact alone of the evidence not being enough to meet the burden of proof for this claim is enough to not justify a belief in a God, but I think there's also things in the natural world which we see which don't match the claims of religions and the fact of how God functions or what its nature is. So two of those reasons is the problem of suffering or unnecessary suffering in the world, or divine hiddenness. The problem of suffering for me is very specifically about unnecessary suffering, which I do understand there has to be a level of suffering in the world for specific reasons, such as just as having the suffering, having the pain of working out and building muscles, and there you go, you achieve the greater good of having a good physique. Or there are sufferings which lead to greater goods. But there's unnecessary sufferings in the world, which there's no way that they could lead to any. For example, why are some infants born and they get a stroke immediately, and within an hour they completely die? They suffer and they go through pain and they die. What is the point of that suffering? That doesn't achieve any greater good. That doesn't achieve anything. It's just a momentary suffering for the kid's life, and then it's done. What was the point of that kid's suffering? Why does there have to be such a huge level of unnecessary suffering in the world? Divine hiddenness is another thing. Is why is this God, the creator of the universe, the omnipotent creator of the universe, why is he not super apparent to us if he's really real? And we have to go to these specific holy books, to these specific people, to the specific denomination in order to figure out who he is, how he operates, what he did, and we have to find these out from super ancient texts and history, when this should be an extremely obvious thing to us. And I'm not completely closed off to the idea of there being a creator, being a God. That's fine. I'm fine with that, whatever. But the fact is that the religions of the world, I really feel like they misrepresent this God completely. If there is a real God out there, if there's a true creator that is infinite and is perfect and is all loving, I respect him a lot more than these religions around the world do. Just looking at the religions and the narratives around this God around the world, it's just so apparent that humans made this God in their image, and they have no concept of how infinity, how perfect love can be portrayed in a creation. My whole point here is basically that I expect a lot more from a perfect, all-loving, all-powerful being than what is being presented by these world religions. And I'm just overall unconvinced that there's a need for a God in the first place. I don't think there's a need for it to explain the origin of the universe, because it actually creates more issues of who created God. And if we don't know the origin of the universe, I think the intellectually honest thing to say is we don't know. We don't know yet, or we may never know. We just don't know. Why do we have to make up a fake answer like God in order to appease our fear of the mystery of the universe? And same for the existence of life. I'm not convinced there was some supernatural intervention that created life, that started life, that kickstarted evolution, any of that. There's been some processes studied which life can arise through normal natural processes, and even evolution itself is a completely unconscious, undirected process. So I don't think that it's apparent that there's any kind of intelligence involved in the making of life and the development of life in any way. And also, using God as an explanation for things has just not had a good track record historically, because it was used to explain the weather, and then the weather got explained. It was used to explain earthquakes, and then the earthquakes were explaining volcanoes, explaining the sky, explaining clouds, and eventually science caught up and we explained these things and we figured out they're totally natural. There was no intelligence behind them. So this argument of God doing things, the God being behind things, has just not had a good track record. I also don't see God as necessary to our morality in any way. There's no evidence that our morality comes from an outside source in any way. And also, if it was from God, God would have to get proven first. There would have to be some kind of evidence for God first in order to prove this objective morality from God, because the source of the objective morality has to be established first. I think objective morality overall raises a lot of issues like the Eufeifro dilemma, or which God has the right morality, or how morality has changed through human history, or would morality even exist without humans if it's a subjective thing? What would be the use of morality if humans didn't exist? If humans don't exist, then morality is not objective, because objective things are separate from human subjectivism. There's a lot of reasons I hold my atheist belief, and I'm very open to the idea of a creator God. I'm very agnostic to that, but the idea of these specific gods that people claim exist, I am very atheistic towards. I am not convinced, and I think the burden of proof of those gods has not been shown to be fulfilled in any way. The burden of proof is still there, and it would take a lot to fill that burden of proof. The next belief I have is the belief in materialism. Materialism is the belief that there's no higher realm of existence, there's no metaphysical existence, it's just matter, it's just the substances we can interact with, that's all there is. I don't believe in an afterlife or a soul, because I don't think the evidence has been provided in order to warrant belief in any of those. And one of the arguments from Sam Harris that is evidence against a soul existing is the fact of how our brain interacts in terms of our identity and our self-awareness. The relationship between our brain, our identity, our consciousness is clearly connected to the material world in which our brain exists in. So for example, let's say that you get in a horrible accident and half your brain gets cut off or half your brain gets destroyed, and you have zero self-awareness now of who you are. Your identity is lost, your speech is lost, you don't know how to move around, your motor functions are not working. Let's say even more of your brain is destroyed later on, and you just have literally no idea of your identity, you have no idea who you are, and it's completely gone. Your cognitive functions are completely gone. What makes us think that if the entire brain was gone, if the entire brain stopped working, then we would continue to live on? What makes us think that we would still live on without a brain when we're in this body and our brain gets destroyed, our brain gets damaged, and we lose major motor functions, major personality, major memories? Well, what makes us think that we would continue to live if the whole thing was gone? Materialism is definitely one of those more controversial beliefs which many people disagree with. So if you do disagree, please comment below. We can talk about it. And I'm willing to change my beliefs if there's actually convincing arguments of the fact that there is actually a soul, there's actually a spiritual realm somewhere. So in terms of ethical frameworks, I go with secular humanism, which was founded by Paul Kurtz, which is a set of beliefs that humans can reason their way through morality, reason their way through ethics, using reason, using empathy, using human experience, using scientific evidence of how humans can flourish, instead of using a objective morality from a spiritual realm, from a god or deity that cannot be proven to exist. What I like about secular humanist ethics is that it focuses on what is true to us, what can we know is true, as much as we can know something is true. We cannot 100% prove anything. We could be in a simulation, we could be in a computer getting simulated, and nothing we know is real. But as much as we can prove something, as much as we do have evidence for something, we have evidence for our human experience, for our empathy, for our what we know is best for human flourishing. This also brings me into agreement with another thing that Sam Harris talks about, which is the objective morality. I don't think it's really objective as much as he wants to say that it's objective. I don't agree with him that it's objective, but I think it's a really good point about how we should go about assessing if something is moral or not. I think as an axiom for our morality, we can establish that the worst possible suffering is the worst thing, because by definition, that is not a good thing. That is a bad. So then we have to agree on what the worst possible suffering is, and then at some point we can move on from there and establish morals and establish what reduces suffering. Another thing I like about secular humanist ethics is that it provides a free inquiry of ideas. It doesn't limit you to dogmatic thinking. It doesn't limit you to, oh, you just have to have faith that this thing exists. It limits you to reason, evidence, and empathy of seeing how you can create a moral framework, create a moral situation in which human flourishing can thrive. Because I think that's one of the big problems with objective morality is you shall not murder. Okay, what if it's in self-defense? What if I'm protecting my family? What if it's a war? What happened to do not murder? So I think that's another issue with objective morality, is that it's too narrow-minded. It's too restrictive. Morality needs to be a little bit flexible in order to match to each different situations. Otherwise, we just have to, when we're getting attacked, when we have to defend ourselves, we cannot kill because thou shalt not kill. Okay, that's it. Skepticism is also another thing I use in my daily life whenever there's any kind of claim about God, about science, about the world, about anything that is important enough for me to investigate, that would actually be important to my beliefs that I hold, then I will be skeptical about it and I will go research it and gather as much evidence as I can in order to have a reasonable belief. I think all the beliefs that we hold should be able to correspond with the evidence and the reasons available, and they should be backed by those reasons and evidences. If we're talking about existentialist philosophy, then I'm in most agreement with absurdism. Absurdism is a philosophy that was made famous by Albert Camus in his multiple essays and books, in which he talks about how life is meaningless, and if we try to create meaning in this life, it's ultimately absurd, and because it's ultimately meaningless. But regardless of such meaninglessness, we should strive to rebel against this meaninglessness and continue to live our life even though there is no meaning. My favorite part about this philosophy is that it acknowledges that the universe is meaningless, but it also shows us that we have the ultimate freedom in a meaningless universe. We have the freedom to explore what we want to do with our life. We have the freedom to explore who we want to make ourselves to be. And I think that concept about this philosophy is the most freeing part about it, is that there's ultimate freedom in ultimate meaninglessness. I like this philosophy a lot because it acknowledges the truth of the meaninglessness of the universe and doesn't try to create an illusionary meaning by creating an afterlife or some kind of subjective meaning in their own life. This philosophy doesn't promote what Albert Camus calls philosophical suicide, which is to suspend our reasoning, suspend our belief in the real world in order to create meaning in an alternate spiritual world. And lastly, the philosophy that I'm sure everyone on this channel knows I love by now is Stoicism. Stoicism is full of wisdom which can be used and applied in daily life in order to manage your emotions, in order to deal with grief, in order to deal with happiness, in order to making sure that you're living a fulfilling life. I think if studied correctly and applied correctly to life, Stoicism can be one of the most helpful philosophies that a person can have. But yeah, that's pretty much a few of the philosophies that I believe in. And again, these things are not set in stone. I am willing to change my views if there's objections that are sound and reasonable and make sense. So yeah, anyways, I'm pretty flexible on changing these beliefs. So thank you, Nate, for commenting, and I'll see you in the next video.